So today I want to talk about being a scholarly teacher. And essentially what that means is approaching teaching as a scholarly process itself, thinking about teaching as a scholarly process. So I want to talk about what I mean by scholarly process and then what that means in the context of teaching. I think for a lot of faculty, thinking about the scholarly process is easiest when we think about it in terms of our actual scholarship. So when we think about the process we go through when we do our research, when we do our scholarship, we start with a question, right? Some issue, something that we are curious about, some problem that we're looking to solve. Once we've identified kind of our research question, the first thing most of us do is we go to the literature, right? How have other people answered this question or tried to solve this problem? What do we already know and where are the gaps? That literature review helps us think about what's the best way for me to go about trying to answer this question. Obviously, the methods that you use will be very dependent on your discipline. But basically, every discipline has sort of standard methods and approaches that we would expect to use, right? And so we think about what it means to apply those methods, what it means to answer our question. It means thinking about what data do I need? What evidence will tell me that I have actually answered this question to the satisfaction of my disciplinary standards? Once we've thought about that, we go and do our research, right? We conduct our study, we collect our data, we crunch our data, all of those things. We analyze what we come up with. We determine whether we have solved the problem, whether we have answered the question, particularly whether we've answered it, again, to the standards of our disciplinary norms. And usually at the end of that process, what we have might be a definitive answer to our question, but often what we have is a lot more questions. And so research begets research, and we start this process over again. If we think about then applying the same general process to teaching, what does that look like? So starting with identifying the issue. What's the problem you want to address? It could be something that you want your students to learn, some change in behavior that you'd like to see, presumably will improve student learning, like increased engagement or increased attendance. That might include establishing a baseline for later comparison. That is thinking about what is your teaching or your classroom look like now, and what is it that you want to see change, right? The next step, consulting the knowledge base. This is something that is second nature and obvious as researchers. We would never embark on a new research project without surveying the literature. But as teachers, we often forget that other people have done what we've done before, right? And we sort of reinvent the wheel because we forget to ask, what have others done in similar situations? Or we don't know to ask that or know where to find that. But there is a large established knowledge base in the scholarship of teaching and learning. If not that, at the very least, the knowledge base within your own discipline, asking colleagues, have you tried this? What have you done in order to improve engagement or attendance or help students learn this particular thing? Selecting an intervention and thinking about what methods we're going to use, we often go straight to that, right? Or maybe we even start with that. We hear about something that somebody else is doing that sounds really cool, and we just want to adopt it, okay? But if we consult the knowledge base first, that will also help us think about how effective is that likely to be in my particular context, given the thing that I am actually trying to do. Okay. Also, thinking about what it looks like to actually answer our question or solve our problem means thinking about how will you evaluate the impact, right? What does success actually look like? How will you know whether the changes you're making are having an impact on student learning or student behavior? What evidence will you need to collect? And in particular, thinking about what evidence will tell you if your question or your issue is related to student learning. I want to help my students learn this concept better. We often will use assessments, right? An exam or some sort of assessment that we normally would use to assess student learning. But what evidence will you need in order to know that your students have learned what you want them to learn because of you, because of what you have done and the change that you made? Because what we really want to assess here is what evidence will tell me that my teaching is making a difference. So common forms of evidence for that might be empirical, quantitative data, pre and post tests of learning, comparing outcomes from this class versus a previous class, that sort of thing. Or it could be qualitative. You might ask your students, how did this different thing we did in this class, working in small groups, using clickers, what have you, how did that help you learn, or did it help you learn? Once we've thought through how we're going to actually know that we have achieved our goal, then we can go do, right? You go teach, you implement your strategy, you go teach your class, you collect your data, right? You determine already what evidence you're going to need, you collect that, and then you analyze it. We compare it to some baseline, we look at whether students have actually learned, and if they've learned, is it because of what we did? Did it have the intended impact? And just like with research, usually there's adjustments that we want to make. We all know that teaching is an iterative process. Every semester we think about things that we could do a little bit differently. That's scholarly teaching, right? The big difference between this approach to teaching and what most faculty do is honestly a matter of intentionality. This approach asks faculty to really stop and think about teaching as a continuous investigative process, one that has an existing knowledge base that we can build on, one where we are literally evaluating what we are doing in an intentional, explicit, and focused way. That's scholarly teaching.